The cruelest invitations are the ones sent with a smile. Claire Bennett paused at the towering iron gates of Blackwood Palace, her fingers trembling ever so slightly around the cream-colored envelope that had changed everything only 3 days earlier. The royal seal embossed in silver still gleamed beneath the afternoon sun, making the invitation appear just as impossible now as it had when the messenger first placed it into her hands. Every Omega in the Northern Territories knew that only the most respected families received invitations to the Moon Ascension Banquet, the grand celebration where the kingdom's most influential alphas, betas, and noble bloodlines gathered beneath one roof. Claire had never expected to see the inside of the palace, much less stand before its magnificent gates. She drew a slow breath and looked toward the endless marble stairway leading to the grand entrance. Elegant carriages rolled past one after another, each carrying guests dressed in expensive gowns, tailored suits, and jeweled accessories that reflected the afternoon light. Servants hurried gracefully between the arriving families while musicians welcomed every distinguished guest with soft orchestral melodies echoing across the palace courtyard. Claire quietly smoothed the wrinkles from her simple pale blue dress. She had spent every spare evening during the past month sewing it by hand after finishing long hours working in the village greenhouse. It was modest compared to the glittering garments surrounding her, but it was clean, elegant, and carefully made with love rather than wealth. Her fair white skin glowed beneath the sunlight, and long chestnut hair rested gently over her shoulders. Emerald eyes filled with quiet uncertainty studied the celebration unfolding before her. She still could not understand why someone like her had been invited. The answer came sooner than she expected. As she climbed the final steps toward the entrance, several noble guests immediately recognized her. One woman whispered behind an embroidered fan before nudging her companion. Another gentleman paused in mid-conversation, then quietly laughed beneath his breath. More eyes slowly turned toward Claire until she became the unexpected center of attention before even crossing the palace doors. She lowered her gaze, pretending not to notice, but every soft chuckle reached her ears with perfect clarity. "Is that really her?" someone quietly asked. "The rejected Omega?" another answered. "I heard she actually accepted the invitation." A third voice followed with amused disbelief. "Of course she did. She probably believed she finally belonged here." Light laughter rippled through the gathering crowd. Claire felt her heartbeat quicken, yet she continued walking without changing her pace. Years of quiet rejection had taught her that responding only gave cruel words more power than they deserved. Her late grandmother had often reminded her that dignity could never be taken away unless someone willingly surrendered it. Claire repeated those words silently as she stepped inside the enormous entrance hall where towering crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across polished marble floors. The palace looked even more breathtaking than the stories described. Massive columns carved with ancient wolves stretched toward painted ceilings depicting generations of Alpha Kings watching over the kingdom. Fresh white moon lilies decorated every balcony, while silver banners flowed gently from the high stone walls. It felt like walking inside a dream that belonged to someone else. Unfortunately, dreams could still hide painful truths. A palace attendant accepted Claire's invitation with polite professionalism before directing her toward the grand ballroom. The moment she entered, conversation slowed almost imperceptibly. Hundreds of elegantly dressed guests filled the magnificent hall, yet one by one they noticed the unfamiliar Omega quietly standing near the entrance. Curious glances quickly became knowing smiles. Knowing smiles became whispers. Whispers became open amusement. Claire could almost feel invisible circles forming around her as nearby guests subtly created distance without anyone giving a direct instruction. No one greeted her. No one welcomed her. Even the empty chairs closest to the entrance somehow remained untouched. As though invisible lines had already been drawn around the young woman everyone expected to embarrass herself simply by attending. Across the ballroom, a group of noble daughters exchanged amused expressions while watching Claire search for a quiet place to stand. One of them lifted her glass with a playful smile. "I suppose the entertainment arrived early this year." Gentle laughter followed once again. Claire heard enough to understand their meaning without listening to every word. She walked toward a nearby window overlooking the royal gardens, hoping the peaceful view beyond the glass might steady the growing weight pressing against her chest. Outside, the gardens bloomed beneath the soft afternoon light, untouched by the judgment filling the ballroom behind her. She closed her eyes for only a moment, reminding herself that she had come because someone inside this palace had chosen to invite her. There had to be a reason beyond cruelty. She simply had not found it yet. High above the grand ballroom, hidden behind intricately carved wooden screens overlooking the celebration, a tall figure stood in complete silence. His silver eyes calmly followed the young Omega as she faced every whisper without anger, every mocking smile without resentment, and every painful glance without allowing bitterness to reach her face. The Alpha King had been watching since the very first carriage arrived, and for reasons known only to him, the woman everyone else had come to laugh at was the only guest he had not looked away from. Claire Bennet remained beside the tall window overlooking the royal gardens, pretending to admire the blooming moon lilies while quietly allowing herself a moment to breathe. Beyond the glass, everything appeared peaceful. The gentle breeze stirred the branches of ancient silver trees, fountains shimmered beneath the afternoon sun, and white blossoms drifted across the gardens without concern for titles, bloodlines, or cruel opinions. She wished people could be more like flowers. They bloomed without asking who deserved beauty and offered their fragrance to everyone equally. Behind her, however, the magnificent ballroom felt far less welcoming. Soft orchestral music floated through the hall, while elegantly dressed nobles continued exchanging polite smiles that rarely reached their eyes. Every few moments Claire sensed another glance in her direction. Sometimes it lasted only a heartbeat. Other times it lingered long enough to remind her that she remained the evening's unexpected spectacle. She had attended many village gatherings during her life, yet never had silence felt so loud. An elderly palace servant carrying a silver tray approached her with quiet kindness. "Miss, would you care for a glass of sparkling cider?" Claire smiled gratefully. "Thank you very much." As she accepted the crystal glass, the servant lowered his voice ever so slightly. "I hope you enjoy your evening." It was such a simple sentence, yet after everything she had experienced since arriving, those few sincere words almost brought tears to her eyes. "Your kindness means more than you know," she answered softly. The servant offered a respectful nod before returning to his duties. Unfortunately, the exchange did not go unnoticed. Across the ballroom, a young noblewoman named Lydia Kensington observed the brief conversation with amused curiosity. She leaned toward two companions standing beside her. "Look at that. Even the servants feel sorry for her." Quiet laughter followed. Another woman lifted her jeweled fan to hide a smile. "Perhaps they believe she will need comforting before the evening ends." Claire heard only fragments of their conversation, but she no longer needed every word to understand the intention behind them. She quietly carried her drink toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, where enormous marble columns cast long shadows across the polished floor. She hoped distance might finally free her from becoming the center of every whispered conversation. Instead, it accomplished the opposite. Curiosity often follows those who try hardest to disappear. One distinguished gentleman stopped near a group of influential merchants and casually asked, "Is that truly Claire Bennet?" Another answered immediately, "The same Omega every pack rejected during the spring gathering." "Then why invite her here?" "Because every banquet needs entertainment." None of them laughed loudly. They did not need to. Their confident smiles carried enough meaning. Claire lowered her eyes briefly before reminding herself of the promise she had made years earlier after her grandmother passed away. Never allow another person's cruelty to decide the kind of person you become. She repeated those words silently while taking another slow breath. Across the ballroom, Lady Evelyn Whitlock, one of the oldest members of the Royal Council, quietly observed everything unfolding around the young Omega. Unlike the others, she did not smile at the whispers. Instead, she watched Claire's reactions with thoughtful attention. Most guests would have answered embarrassment with anger or tears. Claire answered it with quiet dignity. Lady Evelyn found that remarkable. Not far away, a little boy no older than 6 wandered away from his parents while chasing a small silver ribbon that had slipped from one of the decorative flower arrangements. The ribbon drifted across the polished marble floor before stopping beside Claire's feet. Without hesitation, she bent gracefully, picked it up, and knelt so the child would not have to reach upward. "I believe this belongs to you," she said warmly. The boy smiled with innocent gratitude. Thank you. His mother hurried over moments later, clearly embarrassed. I am terribly sorry if he disturbed you. Claire gently shook her head. Not at all. He only wanted his ribbon back. The woman smiled sincerely before leading her son away. Several palace servants quietly exchanged approving glances after witnessing the simple interaction. Small acts often revealed far more about a person than grand speeches ever could. Hidden high above the ballroom behind beautifully carved wooden screens, King Adrian Ashford continued watching in complete silence. Theodore Grayson, his oldest advisor, stood respectfully nearby. She has given them every opportunity to prove her wrong, Theodore observed quietly. Adrian's silver eyes never left Claire. And instead they continue proving her right. Theodore folded his hands behind his back. Will you reveal yourself before the ceremony begins? Adrian answered without hesitation. Not yet. May I ask why? The Alpha King remained thoughtful for a long moment before speaking. Because kindness that depends upon rescue is only convenience. I want to know whether hers survives even when she believes no one will come. Down below, Claire quietly returned to the window overlooking the gardens, unaware that every graceful choice she made was being witnessed by the one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. Around her, the whispers continued spreading through the ballroom like invisible smoke, becoming more confident with every passing minute. Yet hidden beneath the polished elegance of the celebration, another story had already begun unfolding, one that none of the laughing guests could possibly see. The elegant melody drifting through the grand ballroom slowly changed as musicians welcomed another wave of distinguished guests. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble, while servants moved gracefully between tables decorated with white moon lilies and silver candle holders. Every detail reflected wealth, tradition, and royal prestige. Yet Claire Bennett felt strangely invisible despite standing in the very center of it all. Invisible, yet somehow impossible to ignore. She quietly placed her untouched glass of sparkling cider onto a nearby table, hoping a slow walk through the ballroom might ease the growing tension resting upon her shoulders. Instead, every few steps seemed to invite another whisper. There she goes. She actually believes she belongs here. Whoever invited her certainly enjoys a good joke. None of the comments were loud enough to become public insults, but together they formed an invisible wall that followed Claire wherever she went. She continued walking with quiet dignity, refusing to allow bitterness to reach her expression. Her grandmother had once told her that the strongest hearts remained gentle even when surrounded by cruelty. Claire repeated those words silently, while reminding herself she had survived far more difficult days than one uncomfortable banquet. Near the center of the ballroom stood an enormous display of fresh moon lilies arranged around an ancient stone sculpture honoring the first Alpha King. Guests admired the craftsmanship while exchanging stories about legendary rulers whose wisdom had united the kingdom generations earlier. Claire paused only briefly, captivated by the delicate flowers. She noticed one blossom leaning awkwardly from its arrangement, its stem bent beneath the weight of surrounding branches. Without thinking, she gently adjusted the flower so it could stand upright again. The movement took only a second. She smiled softly after seeing the arrangement restored to balance and quietly stepped away. Unfortunately, someone nearby noticed. Look, Lydia Kensington remarked with playful amusement. She is already pretending she belongs among the royal staff. Her companions laughed politely. Another noblewoman added, perhaps she hopes someone important will notice how helpful she is. More smiles appeared around the circle. Claire heard the remarks, but chose not to respond. She simply continued walking toward another quiet corner of the ballroom, where enormous windows overlooked the palace courtyard. Behind her, Lady Evelyn Whitlock observed everything with thoughtful eyes. The elderly council member quietly approached the flower arrangement Claire had adjusted only moments earlier. She studied it carefully before smiling to herself. The display truly looked more beautiful now than it had before. Claire had improved something without expecting praise or recognition. Lady Evelyn quietly filed that observation away. Across the hall, Theodore Grayson remained beside King Adrian Ashford behind the carved wooden gallery overlooking the celebration below. The advisor watched Claire's latest interaction before turning toward the king. She never realizes someone is always watching. Adrian remained calm. That is exactly why every choice matters. Theodore glanced toward the gathering nobles below. The others continued judging appearances. Adrian's silver eyes stayed fixed upon Claire. Appearances require effort. Character appears naturally. Theodore slowly nodded, understanding why the king had insisted on observing the guests before revealing himself. A person's true nature often appeared only when they believed no reward awaited their actions. Down below, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the raised platform near the ballroom's center and gently struck a ceremonial staff against the marble floor 3 times. Conversations gradually quieted as every guest turned toward him. "Honored families," he announced warmly. "Before tonight's royal recognition ceremony begins, Her Majesty's Council wishes to acknowledge several guests whose presence represents the unity of every territory within our kingdom." Curious murmurs spread throughout the ballroom. Claire listened politely, without expecting her own name to matter in any way. The announcer continued reading respected family names while servants guided honored guests toward reserved seating near the front of the hall. Then another attendant quietly approached the master of ceremonies and handed him a folded note sealed with royal wax. The man looked surprised after reading it, but quickly regained his composure. He cleared his throat before speaking again. "There has been a slight addition to the guest acknowledgments." Several nobles exchanged curious glances. The announcer looked directly across the ballroom. "Miss Claire Bennett." The room became completely silent. Claire froze where she stood, convinced she had misunderstood what she had just heard. Hundreds of eyes immediately turned toward her. Lydia's smile widened. Several nobles exchanged amused expressions. A merchant quietly whispered, "Now the entertainment truly begins." Claire hesitated, uncertain whether she should move at all. The palace attendant standing nearby offered a respectful gesture toward the ceremonial platform. "Miss Bennett," he said kindly, "they are requesting your presence." Every instinct urged her to refuse. Every painful whisper from the evening echoed inside her thoughts. Yet leaving now would only confirm what others already believed about her. She slowly lifted her chin, smoothed the front of her modest blue dress, and began walking across the polished marble floor with calm, measured steps. Around her, the silence grew heavier with every foot she traveled. Hidden smiles spread through the gathered nobles as though they already knew something she did not. High above them, Adrian Ashford watched Claire continue forward without lowering her head or surrendering her composure. His expression remained unreadable, but Theodore recognized the quiet certainty behind the king's eyes. Whatever was about to happen next would reveal far more than the people gathered below had intended. Claire Bennett continued walking toward the ceremonial platform with calm, measured steps, even though every heartbeat seemed louder than the orchestra surrounding her. The magnificent ballroom had become so quiet that the gentle rustling of elegant gowns echoed across the polished marble floor. Hundreds of curious eyes followed her every movement. Some watched with amusement. Others waited with eager anticipation, convinced they were about to witness the embarrassing moment they had expected ever since she arrived. Claire kept her shoulders relaxed and her gaze steady. She had no idea why her name had been called, but she refused to allow fear to decide how she would carry herself. Her grandmother had always reminded her that dignity was not something another person could grant or remove. It belonged only to the one who chose to keep it. Those words remained firmly planted inside her heart as she reached the raised platform beneath the towering crystal chandeliers. The master of ceremonies greeted her with a courteous nod before turning toward the assembled guests once again. His expression suggested he had received instructions he did not completely understand. He carefully unfolded the royal note a second time, studying its contents before speaking. "Miss Claire Bennett," he announced respectfully, "please remain here while the royal recognition ceremony continues." A wave of whispers immediately spread throughout the ballroom. Several nobles exchanged puzzled expressions. Lydia Kensington covered a smile behind her jeweled fan before quietly leaning toward her companions. "Remain there? They intend to keep her standing in front of everyone." Another young noblewoman answered with a soft laugh. "Perhaps they wish the entire kingdom to remember what happens when someone forgets her place." Claire heard enough to recognize their meaning, yet she offered no reaction. Instead, she folded her hands gently before her and waited with patient composure. The silence surrounding her gradually became heavier than the whispers themselves. Across the ballroom, Lady Evelyn Whitlock watched Claire with growing admiration. The elderly council member had witnessed countless royal ceremonies over the decades. Pride often revealed itself quickly when someone stood before an audience. So did fear. Claire displayed neither. She simply waited with quiet grace, showing the same calm she had carried throughout the evening despite every reason to lose it. High above the grand hall, hidden behind the carved gallery overlooking the celebration, Theodore Grayson glanced toward King Adrian Ashford. "She still believes this is only another test," he observed quietly. Adrian never looked away from Claire, because every test she has faced until now has been designed to break her. Theodore lowered his voice even further. "Will the court understand why you waited?" Adrian answered calmly. "Not today. Today they only need to understand her." Below them, another nobleman slowly approached the platform. Lord Marcus Holloway, a respected elder from one of the oldest Alpha families, carried himself with quiet confidence earned through years of influence. He stopped only a few feet from Claire before speaking in a voice gentle enough to sound polite, yet loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Miss Bennet, you seem remarkably comfortable standing before so many distinguished families." Claire met his eyes respectfully. "I am simply standing where I was asked to stand, my lord." Marcus smiled faintly. "Most people would feel overwhelmed." "Perhaps," Claire answered softly, "but becoming overwhelmed would not improve the situation." Several nearby guests exchanged surprised glances. They had expected nervous excuses or desperate attempts to defend herself. Instead, they found simple honesty. Marcus studied her for another quiet moment before respectfully inclining his head and stepping aside without another word. Even that brief exchange unsettled the gathering crowd. The woman they had expected to become flustered refused to give them the reaction they wanted. Lydia noticed the growing uncertainty among several nobles and quickly attempted to restore the mood. "Composure is easy," she whispered with playful confidence. "Let us see whether she keeps it once the real reason becomes clear." Those words spread through the surrounding guests almost as quickly as every previous rumor. Some smiled once again. Others nodded knowingly despite possessing no real knowledge at all. Claire remained unaware of each whispered prediction. Her attention drifted briefly toward the enormous entrance doors at the far end of the ballroom. They remained firmly closed beneath towering banners embroidered with the royal crest. According to tradition, they would not open until the Alpha King officially entered to begin the final ceremony. She wondered quietly what kind of ruler he truly was. The stories throughout the kingdom described him as wise, disciplined, and impossible to deceive, yet she had never expected her own life to intersect with his in any meaningful way. She lowered her eyes once more, reminding herself that she was merely another guest waiting for the evening to continue. Above the ballroom, Adrian Ashford watched that simple moment with thoughtful silence. She did not search the crowd for sympathy. She did not seek attention. Even now, standing before the entire court, she remained concerned only with preserving her own integrity. Theodore finally broke the silence beside him. "The hall has shown its heart." Adrian gave the slightest nod. "Then it is almost time for mine." At that very moment, the enormous royal doors at the far end of the ballroom echoed with the deep sound of ancient locks slowly turning, and every conversation inside the palace ended at once. The deep sound of the ancient locks echoed through the magnificent ballroom as the enormous royal doors slowly opened inward. Every conversation disappeared instantly. Noble families rose from their seats. Palace servants lowered their heads. Members of the royal guard stood perfectly still as warm evening light streamed through the entrance, illuminating the ceremonial pathway leading toward the grand platform, where Claire Bennet continued standing alone. Her heart beat faster, not from excitement, but from uncertainty. She had spent the entire evening wondering why she had been invited, yet every answer seemed farther away than before. The silence surrounding her grew almost overwhelming as every guest turned toward the entrance, waiting for the arrival of the one man whose presence alone could change the course of the evening. Claire instinctively lowered her gaze with everyone else. She had never seen the Alpha King in person. The stories she had heard throughout her life described a ruler whose wisdom matched his strength, a leader respected by every pack across the kingdom, and a man whose decisions shaped generations. She expected grandeur. She expected authority. What she did not expect was the strange feeling that someone had already been quietly watching everything long before this moment. King Adrian Ashford entered the ballroom with calm, measured confidence. His formal black ceremonial coat shimmered beneath the crystal chandeliers, embroidered with silver thread that reflected the soft candlelight, like moonlight across still water. His posture remained relaxed yet commanding, and every step carried the quiet certainty of someone who never needed to prove his authority because everyone already recognized it. Behind him walked Theodore Grayson and several members of the Royal Council, maintaining respectful distance as the Alpha King continued toward the center of the hall. One by one, every Alpha, every Beta, and every noble guest bowed deeply. The movement swept across the ballroom like a single wave. Hundreds of heads lowered in perfect unison. Claire followed tradition immediately, lowering her own head respectfully while wondering whether the ceremony would finally explain the mystery surrounding her invitation. Lydia Kensington smiled to herself without lifting her eyes. She remained convinced that whatever recognition Claire had received would soon become the greatest embarrassment of the evening. Several other nobles quietly shared the same expectation. The Master of Ceremonies stepped forward and bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, the honored guests have gathered according to royal tradition." Adrian gave a calm nod, but said nothing. Instead of immediately approaching the ceremonial throne waiting at the far end of the ballroom, he slowly surveyed the assembled guests. His silver eyes moved across every noble family, every respected elder, every influential merchant, and every decorated alpha present. The room remained completely silent beneath his careful observation. Then something unexpected happened. Rather than continuing toward the throne, Adrian quietly changed direction. His measured footsteps carried him away from the royal platform and toward the place where Claire remained standing. At first, only a few guests noticed. Then more heads slowly turned. Whispered confusion spread throughout the ballroom. Lydia frowned. Lord Marcus Holloway looked genuinely puzzled. Even several members of the Royal Council exchanged uncertain glances. The Alpha King ignored every reaction. Claire sensed the unusual silence before she fully understood its cause. She slowly raised her eyes and immediately realized Adrian Ashford was walking directly toward her. She instinctively stepped back half a pace, convinced he must be approaching someone standing behind her. She glanced briefly over her shoulder. There was no one else. The realization left her momentarily speechless. Adrian continued forward until only a few feet separated them. Around the ballroom, no one seemed willing to breathe. Claire respectfully lowered her head once again. "Your Majesty," she said softly. Adrian regarded her quietly for a moment before speaking in a calm voice that carried naturally throughout the grand hall. "Miss Bennet." Hearing her name spoken by the Alpha King himself sent another wave of astonishment through the gathered guests. Claire lifted her eyes carefully. His expression held no trace of mockery, no hidden amusement, and no sign of impatience. Instead, she found only thoughtful composure. Adrian glanced briefly toward the platform where she had been asked to stand alone. "Have you been treated with kindness this evening?" The unexpected question caught Claire completely by surprise. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully because she refused to accuse anyone unfairly. "Everyone has made their own choices, Your Majesty." Adrian studied her answer with quiet interest. That was not the question. Claire looked down briefly before answering honestly. "Some people have been kind. Others have not. I do not wish to judge them for it." Several nobles shifted uneasily. Lady Evelyn Whitlock closed her eyes for a brief moment, recognizing the remarkable grace hidden inside such a simple response. Theodore Grayson quietly watched the reactions spreading across the ballroom. Adrian remained silent for another heartbeat before slowly turning his gaze away from Claire and toward the hundreds of guests surrounding them. His calm expression did not change, yet something inside the room itself seemed different now. Every person present understood that the evening they believed they controlled had quietly slipped beyond their expectations, and the Alpha King's next words would decide not only Claire Bennet's future, but the reputation of everyone who had spent the banquet believing they were watching nothing more than harmless entertainment. The silence lingering inside the grand ballroom seemed to stretch across every marble column and crystal chandelier as King Adrian Ashford slowly faced the assembled court without stepping away from Claire Bennet. No one dared whisper now. The same nobles who had spent the evening exchanging quiet laughter suddenly found themselves avoiding one another's eyes. Claire remained standing with calm composure, still uncertain why the Alpha King had chosen to speak with her before the entire kingdom. She had expected another difficult moment, perhaps another misunderstanding, yet the steady expression on Adrian's face carried neither judgment nor pity. It carried something far more unsettling for those who had mocked her. It carried certainty. Adrian allowed the silence to remain for another heartbeat before addressing the gathered families in a calm voice that reached every corner of the magnificent hall. "Tonight, I have watched many conversations," he began. "I have watched many choices. Some were generous. Others were revealing. No one moved. Even the musicians stood perfectly still beside their instruments." Adrian slowly turned his gaze across the ballroom, meeting the eyes of respected elders, wealthy merchants, decorated alphas, and influential noble families alike. It is easy to honor someone who already possesses power. It is far more difficult to honor someone who appears to have none. Those words settled heavily across the gathering. Claire quietly lowered her eyes, realizing for the first time that the Alpha King had somehow witnessed far more of the evening than anyone realized. Theodore Grayson stepped forward carrying a beautifully crafted silver case bearing the royal crest. He respectfully opened it before the king, revealing the original invitation addressed to Claire Bennett. Adrian accepted the invitation and held it where every nearby guest could clearly recognize the royal seal. "Many of you believe this invitation was sent by mistake," he continued. "Others believed it was intended as a source of amusement. Neither assumption was correct." Curious murmurs briefly rippled through the ballroom before fading once again. Adrian unfolded the invitation carefully. "This invitation was written under my direct authority." The words struck the room with greater force than any raised voice could have achieved. Lydia Kensington's confident smile disappeared instantly. Lord Marcus Holloway looked genuinely astonished. Lady Evelyn Whitlock quietly closed her eyes, almost relieved that the truth had finally begun to emerge. Claire herself looked at Adrian with visible surprise. She had questioned the invitation every day since receiving it, never imagining the Alpha King himself had chosen her name. Adrian continued without changing his calm tone. "Several months ago, I received reports from villages throughout the Northern Territories describing a young Omega who spent her days caring for neglected gardens, helping elderly neighbors without seeking recognition, and treating every person with equal respect regardless of status." Claire blinked in disbelief. Those had simply been ordinary moments of her life. She had never imagined anyone beyond her village had noticed them. Theodore stepped forward once again, holding several neatly folded letters. These letters were sent independently by village elders, teachers, traveling merchants, and palace servants, Adrian explained. None of them requested reward. None expected recognition. Yet every one described the same person. Theodore handed the letters to Lady Evelyn Whitlock, who quietly read portions aloud for the assembled court. One praised Claire for restoring the neglected memorial garden of a widow without accepting payment. Another described how she regularly shared flowers with families unable to afford them. A third recalled her comforting frightened children during a severe winter storm simply by staying beside them until their parents arrived. Each letter revealed another quiet act of kindness that Claire herself had long forgotten. Around the ballroom, expressions slowly changed. The rumors that had filled the evening suddenly appeared painfully small beside the simple goodness described within those pages. Adrian looked once more toward the assembled guests. "I invited Miss Bennet because I wished this court to witness true character." He allowed those words to settle before continuing. Instead, this evening revealed something else entirely. Several nobles lowered their heads. No accusation had been spoken directly, yet many already understood the lesson. Claire remained speechless. She had never performed those acts hoping someone powerful would notice. She had simply believed kindness mattered even when no one was watching. Adrian slowly turned back toward her. "Miss Bennet." She met his eyes respectfully. "Yes, Your Majesty. Everything said about you tonight could have changed your heart." Claire answered softly. "Only if I had allowed it." A faint smile touched Adrian's face for the first time that evening. It was subtle, yet unmistakably genuine. "You did not." Around them, the atmosphere inside the ballroom shifted completely. The same guests who had once looked upon Claire with amusement now saw someone whose quiet strength had been recognized by the Alpha King himself. Lydia stared silently toward the polished floor, unable to meet Claire's eyes. Even those who had spoken only a few careless words felt the weight of their own assumptions. Adrian finally extended one hand toward Claire with quiet dignity. "Would you walk with me?" Claire hesitated only briefly before placing her hand gently in his. The ballroom remained silent, not because anyone had been ordered to remain quiet, but because every person present understood they had just witnessed the moment the entire evening changed forever. Claire Bennett's fingers rested lightly in King Adrian Ashford's hand as an astonished silence settled over the grand ballroom. No one had expected the Alpha King to step away from his throne, much less offer such a gesture to the woman many had dismissed only moments earlier. Claire herself remained almost unable to believe what was happening. She looked toward Adrian with quiet uncertainty, searching his expression for any sign that she had misunderstood his intention. Instead, she found only calm sincerity. His steady gaze carried neither sympathy nor obligation. It carried respect. Around them, the elegant guests who had spent the evening exchanging whispered judgments stood motionless beneath the crystal chandeliers. Lydia Kensington slowly lowered the jeweled fan that had hidden so many amused smiles throughout the banquet. Lord Marcus Holloway remained perfectly still, replaying every conversation he had witnessed since Claire arrived. Lady Evelyn Whitlock quietly smiled to herself, grateful that truth had finally entered the room before pride had done even greater harm. Adrian gently guided Claire a few steps toward the center of the ceremonial platform. He never hurried her. Every movement remained measured, allowing the gathered court to witness not simply where they stood, but how they stood, side by side, equal in dignity. Theodore Grayson stepped forward carrying the royal staff and struck it gently against the polished marble floor. The clear sound echoed throughout the magnificent hall. "By the authority of the Alpha King," he announced, "the royal recognition ceremony shall now continue." Every noble guest instinctively straightened. Adrian accepted the ceremonial staff only briefly before returning it to Theodore. "Tonight," Adrian said calmly, "I intended to recognize someone whose actions have strengthened this kingdom without seeking reward." His silver eyes slowly moved across the assembled court before resting once more upon Claire. "Many believed greatness begins inside palaces. I disagree. Sometimes it begins inside the quietest village, inside ordinary choices repeated day after day, long before anyone important is watching." Claire felt warmth rise gently into her cheeks. She had never imagined that planting flowers, helping neighbors, or comforting frightened children could matter beyond the people standing directly before her. Adrian continued, "Power can command obedience. Wealth can purchase admiration. Status can attract attention. But none of those qualities guarantee character." Several council members nodded thoughtfully. The ballroom remained completely silent. "Character appears when kindness is offered without expectation," Adrian said. "Miss Bennet has demonstrated that truth for many years." Theodore opened another beautifully bound folder containing additional reports gathered from villages across the kingdom. One by one, respected council members quietly confirmed the stories Adrian had already shared. A retired teacher described how Claire spent every Saturday reading to children whose parents worked long hours. A traveling physician recalled arriving during a harsh winter to discover Claire organizing warm meals for elderly residents without asking anyone for recognition. A palace gardener, invited to speak unexpectedly, smiled as he remembered meeting Claire months earlier at a regional flower exhibition where she had freely shared rare seeds with strangers rather than keeping them for herself. None of the stories sounded extraordinary by themselves. Together, however, they revealed a remarkable life built from countless ordinary acts of compassion. Claire lowered her eyes, embarrassed by so much attention. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "there were many others helping beside me. I should not receive credit alone." Adrian looked at her with quiet admiration. "Even now, you share recognition before accepting it yourself." Gentle murmurs spread through the gathering. Those words carried greater weight than another royal speech ever could. Lydia slowly closed her eyes. For the first time that evening, she recognized the painful difference between appearance and substance. She had spent hours protecting her reputation, while Claire had spent years building hers without ever speaking about it. Lord Marcus stepped forward respectfully. "Your Majesty, may I speak?" Adrian nodded once. Marcus turned toward Claire. "Miss Bennet, I believed rumors before seeking truth. I regret that deeply." Claire offered him a gentle smile. "Thank you, my lord. Honest reflection is never too late." Her answer surprised many once again. No triumph entered her voice. No resentment lingered beneath her kindness. She accepted the apology as naturally as she had accepted every earlier hardship. Adrian slowly faced the assembled nobles once more. "Let every family present remember this evening. A person's value is not determined by the loudest opinion in the room. It is revealed by the quiet choices they make when applause is absent." Those words settled across the ballroom with unmistakable clarity. Many guests lowered their heads, reflecting upon their own conversations throughout the banquet. Others quietly looked toward Claire with entirely new understanding. She had entered the palace surrounded by laughter. She now stood surrounded by respect she had never asked to receive. As the orchestra gently resumed its melody, Adrian remained beside her, and every wolf within the magnificent hall understood that the evening would forever be remembered not as the banquet where an omega was mocked, but as the night an entire kingdom learned the difference between reputation and true character. The gentle melody of the palace orchestra drifted through the grand ballroom once again, yet the atmosphere no longer resembled the celebration that had welcomed Claire Bennet only a short time earlier. The laughter had disappeared. The whispered remarks had fallen silent. Even the proudest noble families now stood with thoughtful expressions, as though every conversation they had shared throughout the evening had suddenly returned to them with new meaning. Claire remained beside King Adrian Ashford, still overwhelmed by everything that had unfolded. She had arrived believing she would quietly endure another evening of judgment before returning to her simple village life. Instead, she now stood beside the Alpha King himself while an entire royal court reconsidered the assumptions it had made about her. Adrian slowly released Claire's hand, not to create distance, but to allow her to stand confidently on her own before the assembled court. He wanted every guest to understand that the respect she had earned belonged entirely to her own character. Theodore Grayson stepped forward carrying another royal document, sealed with silver wax. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, "the final declaration prepared for tonight's ceremony." Adrian accepted the document, but did not open it immediately. Instead, he addressed the gathering once more. "There is one final lesson this evening must leave behind." Every guest listened carefully. A kingdom cannot remain strong if its people decide another person's worth before learning who they truly are. His calm voice echoed gently beneath the towering ceiling. "Rumors travel quickly. Truth walks more slowly. Yet truth always arrives." Lady Evelyn Whitlock quietly smiled as several younger nobles lowered their heads in silent reflection. Lord Marcus Holloway remained standing with one hand respectfully over his heart. Lydia Kensington could no longer hide behind polite expressions. She slowly stepped away from her companions and approached the ceremonial platform with measured steps. The magnificent ballroom watched in complete silence. Reaching the front of the platform, Lydia respectfully lowered her head toward Claire. "Miss Bennet," she said quietly, "I allowed pride to guide my judgment before kindness had the opportunity to speak. I repeated words I never should have believed. I sincerely apologize." The apology surprised everyone. Claire looked at the young noblewoman for a brief moment before offering the same gentle smile that had remained unchanged throughout the evening. "Thank you for your honesty," she answered softly. "We all have moments when we see only part of another person's story. What matters is choosing to see more once we realize we were wrong." Lydia slowly lifted her eyes, visibly relieved that she had been met with grace rather than resentment. Several other nobles quietly exchanged thoughtful glances before following her example. One by one, respected guests approached Claire with sincere words of regret for believing rumors they had never questioned. Claire accepted every apology with calm humility. She neither reminded anyone of their earlier laughter nor sought satisfaction in their embarrassment. Her kindness remained exactly the same whether people admired her or misunderstood her. Adrian watched every exchange with quiet approval. Theodore leaned closer and spoke softly enough that only the king could hear. "You chose correctly." Adrian answered without taking his eyes from Claire. She chose correctly long before I ever met her. The royal declaration remained unopened in Adrian's hands. Finally, he unfolded the elegant parchment and addressed the ballroom once again. By the authority entrusted to the Alpha King, I formally recognize Claire Bennett as an honored citizen of Blackwood Kingdom for extraordinary character, unwavering compassion, and selfless service to communities throughout our lands. A respectful wave of applause filled the ballroom. This time the sound carried no hesitation. Palace servants smiled proudly. Members of the royal council applauded with genuine admiration. Even those who had once doubted Claire now joined wholeheartedly, understanding that the recognition celebrated not wealth or influence, but goodness itself. Claire felt tears gathering in her eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. She had never imagined standing inside the royal palace for such a reason. She looked toward Adrian with quiet gratitude. "Your Majesty, I do not know how to thank you." Adrian gently shook his head. "You have already thanked this kingdom many times. Most simply never noticed until tonight." Those words touched many hearts more deeply than any royal proclamation. Lady Evelyn Whitlock stepped forward carrying a beautifully crafted silver brooch shaped like a blooming moon lily, the ancient symbol of quiet service within the kingdom. She carefully fastened it to Claire's dress. "Wear this with pride," the elderly council member said warmly. "Not because it changes who you are, but because it reminds others to look beyond appearances before reaching conclusions." Claire touched the small brooch gently, overwhelmed by the kindness surrounding her. She realized the palace itself had not changed. The marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and towering banners remained exactly as they had when she first entered. What had changed were the hearts of the people standing beneath them. Adrian looked across the assembled court one final time before the ceremony concluded. Every face now reflected respect rather than ridicule. Every conversation that would leave the ballroom tonight would carry a different story than the one that had begun the evening. Claire quietly drew a steady breath as hope gently replaced the uncertainty she had carried through the palace doors. For the first time since receiving the mysterious invitation, she finally understood why she had been asked to come, and she realized that sometimes the greatest victories were not won by proving other people wrong, but by refusing to let their misunderstanding change the person you were always meant to be. The final applause slowly faded into a peaceful silence that felt completely different from the uneasy quiet that had greeted Claire Bennett when she first entered the palace. Earlier that evening, every whisper had carried doubt. Now every face reflected thoughtful respect. The crystal chandeliers continued casting warm light across the magnificent ballroom, yet somehow the entire hall seemed brighter than before. Claire gently touched the silver moon lily brooch fastened to her dress, still struggling to believe everything that had happened within only a few hours. She had arrived expecting to endure another painful reminder of where others believed she belonged. Instead, she had discovered that quiet kindness possessed a strength capable of changing even the proudest hearts. King Adrian Ashford looked across the assembled court one final time before descending from the ceremonial platform. He no longer saw divided families or competing noble houses. He saw people who had been given an opportunity to choose wisdom over assumption. Some had accepted that opportunity more quickly than others, yet each person now understood the lesson the evening would leave behind. Adrian slowly approached Claire once again, his expression calm, but noticeably warmer than before. "Miss Bennett," he said gently, "the formal ceremony has ended." Claire smiled softly. "Then perhaps I may finally thank you properly, Your Majesty." Adrian shook his head almost immediately. If anyone deserves gratitude tonight, it is the woman who reminded this kingdom what true character looks like. Claire lowered her eyes with quiet humility. "I only tried to remain the same person my grandmother taught me to become." Adrian answered without hesitation. "That is precisely why this evening mattered." Theodore Grayson approached with a respectful smile. "Your Majesty, the royal gardens have been prepared should you wish to conclude the evening there." Adrian nodded before looking toward Claire. "Would you care to join me for a walk?" Claire accepted with a graceful nod. "I would be honored." Together, they left the grand ballroom at an unhurried pace. This time, no invisible circle formed around Claire. Instead, noble families respectfully stepped aside to clear a path. Palace servants smiled warmly as she passed. Lord Marcus Holloway bowed with sincere respect. Lydia Kensington offered another grateful smile, relieved that forgiveness had been freely given rather than reluctantly offered. Lady Evelyn Whitlock quietly watched the young Omega leave the ballroom and whispered to herself, "The kingdom will remember this night for many years." Beyond the palace doors, cool evening air welcomed them into the royal gardens. Moonlight reflected across a peaceful lake while hundreds of floating lanterns drifted gently above the water. Ancient silver trees lined elegant stone pathways, their leaves shimmering softly beneath the full moon. The beauty surrounding them seemed untouched by pride, status, or rumor. Claire breathed deeply, allowing the peaceful silence to replace the tension she had carried throughout the banquet. For the first time all evening, she truly felt at ease. Adrian walked beside her without speaking for several moments. Neither of them hurried to fill the silence. Sometimes quiet understanding required no explanation at all. Finally, Claire looked toward him. "May I ask you something?" Adrian smiled faintly. "Of course. Why did you wait so long before revealing yourself? You could have stopped everything much earlier." Adrian considered the question before answering. "Because I wanted the court to reveal its own heart before I revealed mine. If I had entered at the beginning, everyone would have behaved according to duty. Instead, they behaved according to character. Only then could they truly understand the lesson." Claire reflected upon his words while watching a single white flower drift across the surface of the lake. "Then tonight was never only about me." Adrian gently shook his head. "No, it was about an entire kingdom remembering that dignity does not belong only to the powerful." Claire smiled quietly. "I hope they remember." "They will," Adrian answered. "Because they will remember you." They reached the marble terrace overlooking the gardens and paused together beneath the brilliant moon. Behind them, music continued flowing softly from the palace while laughter returned to the ballroom, this time carrying warmth instead of mockery. Claire looked toward the distant horizon where moonlight touched the hills surrounding the kingdom she had always called home. Nothing about the land itself had changed. The villages remained the same. The flowers would bloom tomorrow just as they always had. Yet something inside countless hearts had shifted forever. Adrian rested his hands lightly upon the stone railing beside her. "The strongest leaders are not always those who stand above everyone else," he said quietly. "Sometimes they are the people who continue choosing kindness even after the world gives them every reason to stop." Claire turned toward him with the same gentle smile that had remained unchanged from the beginning of the evening. "Kindness becomes easier when someone once believed in you." Adrian returned her smile. "And now an entire kingdom does." Together they stood beneath the silver glow of the full moon as the palace lights shimmered behind them, looking not toward the painful misunderstandings of the past, but toward a future shaped by compassion, humility, quiet courage, and the enduring truth that a person's greatest strength is revealed not by the honor they receive, but by the goodness they choose to share even when no one believes they deserve it.